Hey everybody! I wanted to make a quick video to document where I'm at in my bullet journal journey. I know bullet journals have become really popular lately. They are both a fun creative outlet for people and a way to make visual how limited our time really is and help people not overschedule, as well as a great strategy and support system for anybody who struggles with executive functioning, just by the nature and flexibility of what tools you can build in. So, I, as a Braille reader, have certainly been interested in trying another way to stay organized. And the bullet journal is appealing to me, but of course, not all of the parts of it go into Braille really easily. And so I'm not using every part. I don't use any of the calendar functionality. I find for me that the best way to keep a calendar and keep myself from booking two events at the same time has definitely become to use my phone's calendar and keep everything in that place and have little pings in my pocket that remind me that it's time for an event to start. Because one of the things I struggle with is knowing about the passage of time. I don't get any of those visual cues of seeing that the clock is at, the 27-minute mark. And so something that starts on the half hour is coming up soon, or even the visual cues of daylight to keep me oriented to time at all. So if I'm working on research, I can get completely lost. And having those little beepers and reminders from my phone is my best strategy right now for calendars. But there are other parts of the bullet journal that I do think are really appealing. For keeping a to-do list, I am loving it. There is just nothing, no app on your phone that can do a list that gives that satisfaction, right? Isn't it a dopamine rush to cross off a finished item? I love it. And so for that, tactile hard copy Braille is really a wonderful thing for my to-do list. Another function that I'm using is the key and index, so that I can use quick symbols and consistent symbols, or eventually consistent symbols, because I'm just starting out and I'm still changing things as I find what works for me. And also the collections. So having that index where I can find my collections again later, I think is going to be really helpful to the sorts of things that get moved off of this week's to-do list into a someday list or into a categorized list, like research ideas or videos to make, those sorts of things. So I'm keeping my journal in an 8x11 portfolio with a zipper. Portfolios with zippers keep me from losing my slates and styluses quite as quickly. I still think styluses should be sold in 20 packs, but that's a problem for another day. So I'm keeping mine in here. I've got both my monster slate that does a full page, as well as my regular 4x8 and one-line slates in the pocket. And I'm using them in a couple of different ways, which is really fun. I also sometimes, to do a brain dump and get a lot of things off my working memory, will throw a piece of paper in one of my Braille writers, either at my desk or in my kitchen, and just get a big list out quickly that way. And then I use the slates to do the rest of the bullet journal process, the tracking and specifically the migrating, and using those modifiers to change my bullets after they're written when I need to migrate something forward. Also, I want to note before I show you this Braille, which will look like it has a smudgy background, that this Braille has been intentionally smudged to make it pick up better on camera. Which means I won't actually stick this page back in my bullet journal because I don't like the feeling of smudgy paper. But this is my key, and it's got a number of things. So for bullets, I'm using the hollow dot for an item that's a to-do item, and I've got that listed twice here because I kind of wanted to learn the names of the specific types of bullets in Braille. They're not something that I've used different kinds of a whole lot before in reading and writing, and so it's a new skill, so I just wanted to note that for myself. I use a standard asterisk for a note. I'm using an actual bullet point, the 456 drop D, for an event, if an event makes it onto my to-do list. But mostly what I'm using is that hollow dot. And the reason I chose the hollow dot is because of its look in Braille. It's a .5 character, and it's short. So when I apply modifiers to it, it's less disruptive to telling what the modifier is as compared to an actual bullet, because the bullet has that 456 prefix and is tall. My modifiers then, and I'm going to move this up so you can maybe see it a little more clearly. My modifiers then are a right pointing arrow for anything that I'm migrating forward. So if it didn't get done last week and my page is full and I have to move it forward onto a new week, I'm going to use this pointing arrow over my existing hollow dot to say I'm migrating it forward. I also have a version of the forward arrow that looks a little different, but it still feels to me like a forward arrow. So one is 2525250, and the other is 3 dots in a row, 3 dots in a row, and then 2 dots on the left with 1 dot on the far right. And you might notice that those don't look quite like Braille. What they are is they're Braille made with my slate and stylus, and they're Braille made with my slate and stylus attached perpendicular to the page, which I find really useful for modifying my list because I can just snap a slate and stylus on quickly, look at an item, mark where it is, flip it over, and modify it. I certainly could do that aligned, but it'd be a lot more moving where I can get most, at least half the edge of a page in one chunk if I use my slate and stylus going the other direction. So that's a technique, I guess, that I use a lot for my personal notes and have started using to do these bullet journal modifiers. So I can migrate things forward either in standard alignment or in perpendicular alignment with a slate. If something is getting moved to a future log or to a collection, one of those themed lists, then it gets an arrow pointing the other direction with the same technique. And if at the end of a week something didn't get done by a deadline and it's not worth doing late, or something just isn't worth my time anymore, sort of that culling out the excess in our lives and getting down to something manageable, then I cross it off with full cells, either in standard orientation or perpendicular to the page. And because my dots are short, it can cover up that full hollow dot symbol. So those are the modifiers that I'm finding work really well for me in Braille and kind of the technique that I've been using to make it work. I also came up with really specific spacing for myself that give me room to do those dots and the modifiers. So my items with a hollow dot begin in cell 2, which is not at all a standard Braille anything, but I'm skipping one cell, putting my dot, and then skipping 2 cells and starting my item. Again, not at all a standard Braille spacing, but it's a spacing that allows me then to draw my arrow over it. And you can see here what it looks like when the arrow is drawn over a dot, and it gives me room for the arrowhead and then still a space between my word, or to full cell something out without running into my word. So those are kind of the tricks that I've figured out as I modify this system to Braille. I do still have an index page. I've got collections. So one of my collection pages is research ideas, and it's got things that have come up in discussions and meetings that I know someday I'd like to have be on my research agenda. But right now, as I record this video, I'm a doc student finishing my dissertation, and that is not a good time to start new research directions that occur to you. This is the time to focus and hone in and get done. So I am working really hard at, in this phase of my life, keeping my focus narrow and staying on task. And if I have time to work on some research, maybe I don't have all my data in for my dissertation, which is where I'm at right now, working on what pieces of that can I write? What pieces of that can I draft? Can I dummy run the statistics and make sure my equations all work so that when my data does come in, I can move quickly with it? So I'm trying to stay really focused, and that means that the other great ideas that occur to me need to get set aside for future use, and so a research log is a great way to do that. That log does also get backed up onto my computer because that's where it lived before I found out about bullet journaling. So I have ideas, and then I have a to-do list, and it's got a week's date at the top and a pretty line, because how often do you get to use pretty lines in Braille? Never, because they're spatially wasteful and Braille Readers hate wasting space. Speaking of wasting space, all those pretty spreads where they draw things with rulers and divide into different sections, yeah, I don't do that because I need to find my items. And if some item were hanging off on the side of the page, I might never see it again. And then it might not get done. So all my to-do bullets are in a line, one cell in from my edge so I can find them. And then when something gets done, like, hey, making a video about my bullet journal key, then that bullet can get erased. And I'm doing erased for done because it's so satisfying. It's just like crossing off. You know, you can use a Braille eraser, you can use the back of your fingernail if you like. The back end of a rounded slate works really well too. So there's one crossed off. I also can cross off part of a bullet. So the next bullet is just partially erased. It's not fully erased because it's not fully done, but I started that task. Okay, yeah, I like the dopamine of crossing off. Not gonna miss that. So I would encourage that if you are a Braille reader and you have been hearing about this bullet journal craze, that there's a lot of things about it that you'll hear and go, oh, that's really spatial. That doesn't work for me. Oh, that's really going to take a long time to write. It's not going to work for me. There might also be parts of it that will work for you. And for me, that included making a key that uses a hollow dot and has a clear pattern of forward migration and migration to the future log or collections, and a clear way to erase things when they're done. And I just erase the bullet, or cross off a bullet if something is not worth my time. And I'm hoping that if I stick with this strategy, I'll get the same benefits that sighted Bujo users get in terms of honing my focus and my productivity so that I'm doing the things that matter to me and not spending as much time on things that aren't worth the amount of time they take. I suppose with that said, I should probably put a big giant to do on here, which is go play with my little one. And that is exactly what I'm off to do next. Happy brailing!